How's it going, everyone, and welcome to the channel. This weekend saw the fourth set of playtests for the Unreal 5 engine version of Squad, with its main focus being around server-side stability and fixes, and to test out a new workaround for the picture-in-picture optics for those struggling with lower-end hardware, a feature that is strictly a band-aid fix because it looks like this. Yeah, and unfortunately this kinda sets the tone for the rest of this video, because this playtest made me rage quit multiple times because performance was so poor. I have a few things to go into in this video, including a bit more of a technical explanation as to what's going on with the servers and the quest being made to get that right, because let's be honest, if the servers run like garbage, then they are setting themselves up for failure. But the first thing I want to talk about is the new picture-in-picture option. This is absolutely and comprehensively a temporary band-aid fix. It's a last-ditch effort to make sure the game is somewhat playable for those severely struggling for performance. And the stupid thing is, on paper, it ticks all of the boxes that's required. When this setting is on, my FPS goes from 50 to 144 and stays rock solid. So, in terms of performance, it works. And I'm guessing things will be it'll be made to polish this feature a bit more to make it a smoother and more usable experience. Now, I do have an explanation as to why we have a black screen and why it looks like we're playing through Project Reality again. Because picture-in-picture is essentially the game being rendered twice on your screen, that's what allows the background to remain the same and your optic gives the impression of being magnified. Well, the performance mode basically removes one of those visual renders to a single. And that's what they've done. It's just zoomed in the screen to enlarge it to the scale of the optic. But it's also not rendering a full screen. It's rendering essentially a much smaller screen that's then covered by the overlay, and this is why performance on this looks so good. Now, the reason for the black overlay instead of blurring the background is simply because the whole screen is zoomed in. So there's a chance that you'd be able to see more movement in your peripheral vision than you wouldn't normally see, so in the option to reduce any chance of it being used to be sort of exploited or, that sort of ilk, they went with a solid black screen. It makes sense when it's laid out like that, but I don't know, it's just so obvious it's a handful of zip ties keeping things somewhat together that I really can't imagine you guys in the community receiving this very well. But this highlights an issue that affects all optics across the board, and something I've been very, very vocal about for a long time, and that is the fact that all optics are just too damn small. They're going to have to increase pretty much every single optic by about 10 to 20%, depending on the weapon, to make them more user-friendly and in some cases just straight up usable. The ACOGs aren't bad as they are. They are the best of a bad bunch, but two issues still plague them. The first one, because they are so small, you can no longer use the reticle correctly. And by that, I mean you can no longer use the stadia inside of the optic. See, for those that don't know, the ACOG is a clever bit of kit. These lines all mean something. And the main feature I'm talking about here is the stadia. And pre-ICO update, Squad, that worked flawlessly. How it works is you put the horizontal line within the enemy's shoulders. If that line fits shoulder to shoulder, that is your range. And like I said, pre-ICO Squad, this was incredibly accurate and easy to use after some practice. Post-ICO Squad, it's too small to read, and Unreal 5 Squad, with all of this upscaling shit, it's now not only too small, it's simply just not clear enough to use. But the second issue with it is all of the ranging is just completely off. You'll range your target at 300 meters, you shoot at 300 meters, and it lands 100 meters short. Other optics that have issues, like the Russian 1P78, why is half of my screen being taken up by an eye cup? I shouldn't be looking at the eye cup at all. Why is my guy holding it so far out? The PU scope, I know it's a small old relic of an optic, but come on. We haven't shelled out money on nice monitors to only be using 5% of it. And with this new keyhole option, it's just straight out of the question to even think about using. Look, I don't want the optic taking up the full screen, but a lot of them do need to be made bigger for sure. It'll increase enjoyment and make them much easier and better to use without swaying the balance of the game. Making an optic slightly bigger is not going to make them overpowered, because they are already too small. But yeah, the keyhole feature is clearly in its early stages, and it isn't the final fix anyway. Hopefully they'll find some ways to polish this and make it more usable going forwards until they find a more permanent fix. Now, a lot of you guys will have noticed that name tags looked really dumb, big, and obnoxious. I can confirm that in this playtest it is a bug and not an intended feature. I was genuinely worried someone like Sergeant Ross or Baron had been TK'd one time too many, so it was made super big to try and prevent that, but no, it is a bug and will be fixed going forwards. Don't worry. I was worried when I first saw it though. Before I get into personal performance, where I tried the game on 3 different monitors, 1080, 2K and 4K, I want to go into the server side of things because this information hasn't really been spoken about much through the community, through Offworld or various content creators at all. And I was lucky to not only host a playtest server, but also to have a bit of an insight as to what's going on in the background via Siege and Gangry. Also, I do quickly apologise if my voice starts sounding really hoarse as this recording goes on. I am in fact starting to lose my voice, so I'm gonna have to speedrun this now. As I have mentioned in previous videos, server performance and stability is a primary focus of OWI right now, and this is what the foundation for all of our enjoyment in this game is based upon. All of those micro stutters, the freezes, the rubber banding, that's all server-side problems that OWI are trying to iron out. Now, the main difference between playtest 3 and playtest 4 is the server tick rate experimentation and addition of multithreading. Yes, servers are finally using multithreading, and from what I believe and understand, that is mainly linked with the vehicle physics. But this in itself is a huge positive step forward. The next one though is to do with the tick rate. Servers are setting specific TPS and multithreading values, which is the likely cause of significant rubber banding for players during playtest 4, depending on which server you've played on. This was a test to see how much TPS affects the gameplay and if it's viable to lower the TPS lock. Servers running lower TPS are going to have more issues, which is why players might feel like they have an entirely different experience from the last test and from server to server. Prior test recommendation was 64 TPS, but we had servers drop to 30 at various moments. With a little luck as well, this may also help get to the bottom of the unlocked TPS bug that servers are currently experiencing if they haven't been restarted after 36 hours of play. This is when you can't reload reliably, or you can't get in and out of vehicles and interact with stuff, and you get lots of micro stuttering. So I really hope this is nailed too. Now, whilst I can't say about the settings we were told to run in this playtest, I can say our TPS was at 64, and one of the issues that we did notice was our CPU was pinned at 100% for the duration of this, whereas in Unreal 4, it's sort of between 80 and 90. This tiny little bit of headroom going missing has caused a few issues when a lot of explosions or artillery happened. As a result, it significantly reduces the TPS because it simply doesn't have that headroom to compensate anymore. So we saw a lot of dips into the 40s and 30s during this playtest. And naturally, when the TPS start to drop like that is when you start noticing the micro stuttering, the rubber banding, and even breakdown in the in-game communication system. Another thing I noticed is, once again, the newer maps generally performed much better than some of the older ones. Balea, that just feels like a lost cause at this point, but I also noticed that Scorpo was another very poor running map. Mutaha, however, was fantastic from an FPS and TPS standpoint, which was nice to see. Now, they have said that multithreading is a bit hit and miss, so they know it's an issue and that's being worked on. But this playtest should hopefully give them a lot of the information that they are looking for. But I tell you what was a fun server related bug. Occasionally, the server would let in more people than it should. We saw 113 players actually on the ground playing in a match on Al Basra, and I honestly thought that was fantastic. Hopefully, there's potentially scope to increase the player count in the future. But now it's time to move on to performance, and this had me really tilted. 4K for me is still totally unplayable. If I use Ironsight, it is usable, but I have to either choose a game that looks kind of okay and have poor FPS, or choose a game that looks absolutely horrendous and get reasonable performance. Again, I tried loads of graphics settings, but I just couldn't get a happy middle ground. Keep in mind though, I can play Unreal 4 Squad on 4K perfectly fine. So I'm starting to wonder if there's really been any internal testing at all for 4K on Squad at Unreal 5. And I get it, I'm a small percentage of the player base playing at this resolution. But I can play any other game on 4K on my setup with no issues. Hell, I can play Grey Zone Warfare, which is also on Unreal 5, and that's a game I'd completely written off 18 months ago. Squad simply cannot hold a torch to Grey Zone right now. One of the main issues I've noticed is again, it's with the optics, and after testing on my other two monitors, I noticed some things. There's either an issue with the upscaling, which is forced on, but because of this, it's not rendering correctly within the optic, or the game simply just isn't giving me 4K within the optic, and instead it's something like 1080p, which again explains why I have serious clarity issues within the optic no matter what setting I put it on. Now when I tested the game on 1080p, I had everything set to epic, and on Mutaha I was getting 90 to 110 FPS in the middle of a live game, and I can't lie, the game felt buttery smooth and it looked really nice. Optics looked cleaner than they do in my 4K monitor, which is dumb. But yeah, I had very little issues on 1080p. Foliage still has some strange artifact going on around the edges, and chain link fences still causes ghosting, but other than that, I had very little issue on 1080p. Moving on to 2K, on the same settings, all on Epic, I was seeing 60 FPS fairly stably. The game looked stunning. I can't get over that. I can't emphasize that anymore. The game looked stunning at 2K. But I was getting a bit of ghosting on a lot of things, and then if there was a lot of movement, it started to look a bit naff around the edges. Now, I was using TSR rather than DLSS because DLSS just simply looked crap. And again, remember, I'm on a 9950 X3D with a 4070 Ti and 32GB of RAM. So take from that what you will. I would consider that to be pretty high end if I'm honest. So, you know, 100 FPS using upscaling at 1080p, when you put it on paper like that, I don't think that's pretty good. Frame generation on Nvidia cards, or at least my Nvidia card, still doesn't work at all no matter what I do. Looking forward to seeing that get fixed. But there's clearly still a lot, and I mean a lot of work to do graphically, especially with the foliage. That's what looks the absolute worst right now, shortly followed by the players and weapon models. Apart from foliage, environments look incredible. The shading's looking really, really good, and the water does look absolutely sublime. But to reference back onto Grey Zone Warfare, their foliage looks fantastic in comparison. So the tools are clearly there to get this right in one way or another, they just need to find a way. There's a lot of other bugs that propped up as well, things like the vehicle reset issues, audio issues and whatnot, but I'm still getting this vibe that this may be getting pushed out way too early, or we're still a long way off being finished. I don't know when it's going to be, and I don't know when they're planning on pushing this out, but it's obviously got a long way to go, but we all know what they're like for pushing out half-baked content, and then working on it for a bit to get it kinda good, and then moving on to the next thing. They do have a history for this. But I genuinely feel if they release this too soon or half-baked, it will severely fracture the community and will shatter what little trust people have left in Offworld. And that may sound harsh coming from me. And yes, I'm not a developer, I literally fix things with a hammer for a living. But I'm very, very passionate about this game and its community, and I only want to see the best for both parties. I always try to be as fair as I can be in these videos and be constructive with my criticism. But at the same time, I'm not going to censor myself simply because I'm partnered with them. My morals come before that. Say what you want about me playing Squad on 4K, I can play perfectly fine on Unreal 4, but Unreal 5 is simply a no-go for me right now. Anyway, I've rambled on enough about this playtest. For me, a very disappointing one from a player perspective, but it was a nice little insight from the server side. Again, I will keep you in the loop as and when I know more, or when there are some more playtests coming up. So don't forget to subscribe for more squad guides, gameplay and updates. Use code Honcho30 on Squad's online store to save 30% on a new purchase of Squad. Tell your friends. And thank you all for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next video. Good night.